Tanzania personal data protection law has been enforced. Journalist Daron Bartlett joins us from Kampala, Uganda. Good morning, Daron. Thanks for joining us.
Morning. How are you doing?
We're very well. Second time seeing you this week, so it's a good week for us.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about Tanzania. President Samia Suluhu Hassan has back to back, continued to do things that maybe would make her one of the Tanzania's best leaders. But we'll see how that turns out. The Personal Data Protection Act number 11 of 2022, which was passed by the Tanzanian government, came into effect on May 1st. Now, what is this new law and how does this affect citizens?
Well, there's been a huge development in terms of technologies. And Tanzania, if you look through the whole of East Africa, it has the highest internet penetration. And there was just really need to make sure that as the new developments come, as data is now being collected by telecoms, and the introduction of people like Starlink, Elon Musk, Starlink in the country recently being given a license to be able to provide information. Internet services, but also when you go to things like the emergency of applications that provide cash or transfer of information, they had to come up with measures to make sure that people's data is actually protected. Because when you look at things like applications that are giving people loans, if you want to get a loan, you have to put in your mobile number, your next of kin's number, and then you have to take a photograph of yourself for them to be able to approve you. But in the actual sense that these applications are actually not jurisdicted within the country, so they look like they're being operated from somewhere else, and that means that people's data is not protected, and most of the times is that information is sold to different people. So Tanzania last year in November comes up and says that if the Europeans are having conversations about data privacy and protection, the Americans are debating about this whole thing of TikTok collecting people's data and not knowing where it's being used. The same debates have been happening in Australia and all over the world. That was just important. It was very important that the Tanzanians are protected as well. And they came up with some of the nice laws in terms of protecting data. Now, that doesn't mean that previously Tanzania did not have a law that protected people's data. In fact, in the constitution, the Article 16, it had it, but these laws were enacted way back, just right after independence, and they were basic. So the data collection at that point that was defined was things like electoral commission collecting data, national registration, and census that happens in a country. But the emergence of technology meant that it was on its own. So they had to come up with something and enhance this law to make it a little bit stronger. So they went ahead and defined or introduced terms like a data collector. Who is a data collector? They introduced a commission that then licenses a data collector, and if they don't license a data collector, then they would give reasons as why they are not licensing the data collector in this space. But some of the things that they talked about here in this, or that have been introduced in the law, is the rights to be informed of data collection and the process, as well as the purpose for that data, because only the government then would tell that this data is being collected for maybe national census and maybe statistics for the government and planning. But to go ahead and ask for personal information was very key. So someone has a right to be informed of the data collection and the process and the reason. Also, the right to access the data collected and processed. So if someone comes out and says, hey, I need some information of mine, you should be, the government or the data collector must be able to provide that data. But also the right to object the process of collecting data, where such process will lead to adverse impact has been placed in there, and also the right to rectify data in case it's not accurate. So most of the times you've seen people with IDs that don't read their names accurately, probably because of how your name is pronounced, and arguing. I have suffered from this personally, where people pronounce or write Bartlett with a single T, or pronounce my name as Bartlett. They think the T in the middle is not necessary. and you have to argue with them in order to rectify such kind of information. But they also introduced some very strict laws, penalties in case data has been misused. We've seen punishments go as far as $4,300 in case someone puts out your data without actually your consent. So consent of publishing data has also been very, very, very key. They have also defined people like children. Information on children being published on platforms such as social media without their consent is now, it could be criminal in case they came out to you. So yes, it's going to impact on people, especially, and this to become more social. To bring it more home on social aspects. I have seen people publish pictures of children who are not theirs. You wake up, poster, and someone has decided to put up the picture of your child, and yet yourself you've never actually put up a picture of your child for purposes of protection from crimes like kidnapping and things like that. But then someone thinks, just because Osa is my friend, I can put up their picture and just walk away like that. So the kid deserves privacy, and such a strong law is out there to prevent such practice. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's quickly touch on one more story that's indeed firing up the entire East Africa. Of course, aside from data privacy and protection, which you've touched on, and permit me if I say, Mr. Bartlett, like you rightly mentioned. We know what that cost is. But let's go to Kenya now. Let's find out what the current status of bipartisan talks is. Has it crumbled, or are there hopes that these bipartisan talks between ruling Kenya Kwanza and, of course, opposition Azimio la Umoja One Kenya will actually draw success and bring about a peace so that William Ruto can focus on his administration?
I am going to use my words a little bit carefully this time. I can say that there is a dim light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm calling it dim because these talks are finally going to commence, but with lots of restrictions or conditions from the opposition party, which is the Azimio la Umoja led by Raila Odinga. Now, if you notice that these protests were supposed to have resumed, and indeed they happened on Tuesday, but it was not successful as it hoped to go. In fact, the press was all out there saying that these protests flopped. People didn't really go out that much, but okay, they were supposed to have happened yesterday as well, but they have been called off because Raila Odinga says he talked to his team, the 7-member team, and they agreed on specifics, and they have accepted to go and engage in conversations. But one of the things that actually triggered the conversations to happen is that the government had to drop one of the members who is actually an opposition member and a member of parliament from their committee. They felt that was betrayal, and once he was dropped and pushed out, they felt that now we can have transparent conversations on how to run the affairs of this country, especially when it comes to economics, political, and also social aspects here. And they went back still with their 4 pillars and said that one of them is that they have to release protesters who were arrested in the previous protests that happened ever since this Mandamano kind of protest was introduced, but also two, that they should reintroduce subsidies that were removed on ugali. I think in Nigeria you call it pap, basically maize flour. Yeah, so because that is the food, that is the staple food in Kenya. Even when the economists in the country argue that reintroducing subsidies makes the government run out of money because they are using their coffers to pay up that tax that is supposed to be paid up to ensure that people access this ugali at a cheaper rate, and a matter of fact that the country is in debt and they cannot afford to go to the coffers to pick that money and put it out there. But we shall see where it goes, where the government will actually reintroduce the subsidies on things like posho. But also 3, that there should be an audit in the elections that happened last year because they need to be fair. So they have put really strong conditions on these conversations to happen. And the one most complicated that I think will complicate all these talks is saying that these conversations should happen in only 30 days. They don't want to go beyond this. But if we know that these are conversations, these are things that people have to disagree and agree on, 30 days may not actually be enough to handle these four most important things here, because there is an understanding of economics that you have to explain to people. The country is suffering from inflation. Actually, it's at the lowest. It has dropped by over 12%, their currency in terms of value. Now, introducing subsidies would be something difficult. So looking at it on a political side, it may make sense, but again, on the economic side, it may not make actually sense. There's a question that again kept on rising in here and there, the issue of power sharing, which is interesting here now. Previously, when there was the Building Bridges initiative that was introduced by President Kenyatta, which birthed the handshake with Raila Odinga at that time, where they were talking about the BBI having things like introducing the leader of opposition, having a prime minister, and also having 2 deputy cabinet ministers into that government. That was in the proposal of the BBI, which Ruto was actually against. And that's how they fell out with the president at that time. And here he is, the president. So bringing back the conversation of power sharing is very difficult on the side of the government. And in fact, we don't see Ruto listening to that conversation. And if he does, there could only be a probability that he could introduce things like the leader of opposition, and that is it. But again, that's the conversation that they have refused to have in Parliament. As the bipartisan talks, they think that let's go and have this conversation outside, so that we can have members who are both in Parliament and those who are outside Parliament can advise on that direction on such complicated conversations.
All right. Well, in the interest of time, we of course will have to wrap up here. Our hearts go out to those who have affected by the downpour and of course the mudslides in Rwanda. I hear about 100 lives have been lost. We will of course continue to follow up that story. But thank you very much, Daron Bartlett, for stopping by on a Friday. Good to see you.
Did you
again.
add the T?
Yes, with a T. Daron Bartlett.
Yeah, with a T. This is a white man's language. And by the way, you're probably invited to go for the coronation of King Charles. I don't know if you're going.
We do have our correspondent who will be there live. So we'll talk to the correspondent.
Thanks a lot, Daron, for stopping by. Have a great weekend.
Welcome.